Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you and the ranking member of the Law Row, as well as Chairman Rogers and ranking member Maine for your tremendous work on this bill. But I rise in opposition to the legislation, and I associate myself with many of the objections that have been raised by my Democratic colleagues. This bill's cuts to the Department of Justice funding bring to mind this recent characterization of Republican ideology, and I'm quoting, "There must be in-groups whom the law protects but does not bind, alongside out-groups whom the law binds but does not protect." This was the ideology recently expressed by a conservative ideologue and what I lived in the Jim Crow South when I was growing up. Now, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke to this issue in his letter from the Birmingham City Jail when he defined an unjust law that we were all violating, breaking. King wrote, "It is a code that a numerical or power majority group compels a minority group to obey, but does not make it binding on itself." The 1960s civil rights activities did much to eliminate unjust laws and the two-tier justice system of Jim Crow. Regrettably, just as the progress of the 1860s was reversed by the so-called Redeemers and culminated in Jim Crow, I fear that the gains of the 1960s are being jeopardized by the MAGA movement. While the primary in-group, out-group divide under Jim Crow was black and white, today a different hierarchy is emerging. President Trump and his cronies enjoy the law's protection, but are free to break the law without accountability, while everyday Americans are less protected against lawbreakers. This bill lessens protections for victims of federal crimes by slashing FBI funding. It lessens protections against gun crimes by gutting the funding for ATF. It lessens protections for communities threatened by the opioid epidemic by cutting funding for organized crime drug enforcement task forces. This legislation lessens protections for children by cutting juvenile justice grants. It lessens protections for women by cutting violence against women grants. It lessens protections for low-income Americans by cutting legal services corporations funding. The bill lessens protections by eliminating funding for community violence intervention and prevention grants, hate crime prevention and prosecution grants, and the Justice Department's Community Relations Service. These cuts come on top of President Trump's reckless pardons of nearly 1,600 criminals, which have deprived victims of $1.3 billion in restitution and fines. The Trump administration and many Republicans in Congress have made it clear that their law enforcement priorities are sneaky apprehensions, inhuman detentions, and mass deportations. I support the rule of law, including enforcing immigration laws, but we must do so in a manner that is in the best interest of the American people and public safety. The double standard being perpetuated today are sweetheart deals for the rich, powerful, and well-connected, while everyday Americans are left unprotected against high costs, illnesses, hunger, scams, and many other harms. I urge my colleagues to vote against this bill and to join the efforts of getting our country back on the path toward being one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I yield back.